This is, should be, you take it, put it up at work. This is specificity. This is what people don't understand. And this was actually not part of what I was going to go over today, but I had these lying around my house. Don't you guys have like things like this lying around your house? So what it basically shows is what order of precedence selectors will take. So actually, let me. Specific. I figure if I actually put it on the board, it would be easier for you to read. Okay, so what it basically says is an element, like an LI, has very, very low specificity. What happens is the reason that these two actually have the exact same weight. If you look at specificity, if you look here, we are down right around on this line, where we have a class plus an element. So it's 0-1-2, because you have two elements and one class. But it's the order, whatever comes later takes precedence. So if I had done this, it would turn green, and then it would make it illegible because it's on the next line. So here I remove the LI. It's still targeting anything that has my class, but it turned green because this has more weight. So even though it comes before it in the precedence, it has more weight, so it takes, the code comes before it in the source code order. It takes precedence because you have one class and two elements. That's 0-1 for class, -2 for two elements, if you look at this thing. So I'll be like referring to this. This might not make sense if you've never heard of this before. Hopefully it will make sense by the end of the day. Right now I know that you guys are probably confused. Are you guys confused? Yeah. Okay. Then let's go over it right now. We're going to switch out and come back. Okay. So we have different types of selectors. Everyone know the global selector? The star targets everything on the page. It has a weight of 0. So any other selector will take precedence over the selector. Then you have, this is a plankton, and I don't actually know what plankton really look like. I've never seen any. So this is kind of stolen from SpongeBob SquarePants and changed a little bit so that it doesn't look like it too much and don't get sued too badly. But yeah, I need to change it. So one element. Elements have the lowest precedence. So the weight is 0-0-1. Then when you have classes take more precedence. So when you have 0-1-0, you will always take precedence over that if they're targeting the same element. So let's say you have 10 elements here. Here we have 14 plankton. 14 plankton, or 0-0-14, takes less precedence. There's a handout right there for you. 0-0-14 takes less precedence, it's less specific than a single class selector. Because this is 0-1-0. So in the spec it says no matter how many elements you have, how many element selectors you have, it'll have lower specificity than a single class. So supposedly if you have 1,000 elements, which if you ever have 1,000 elements in your CSS declaration, find another job. But let's say you do. Supposedly, it should take precedence over any class. The truth is, browsers don't do that correctly. Only Opera does. So if you have more than 254, it will actually outweigh the class. But if you have more than 254 selectors, find another job. Okay. So then we have, the thing is, we are going to learn new selectors today, including attribute selectors. So when we learn attribute selectors, just remember that they have the 6 pseudoclasses, what they're called. Pseudoclasses and attribute selectors have the same exact specificity as a regular class. So we're going to learn pseudoclasses, and you haven't learned them yet, but just remember, they will always take precedence over an element. And then down below, we have IDs, which is a sharp. And it's not too subtle, of my opinion, on using ID selectors in CSS. Sharps are dangerous. They're hard to overwrite. So a sharp, one ID selector will basically have more specificity than any number of elements and any number of classes, including all the pseudoclasses we're going to learn today. So to overwrite something that has an ID, to make it more powerful, you need to add more and more attributes and class selectors, or you need to add in a second ID, and then you start having IDs, or whatever it's called. Then you have inline styles. And this is also political. It's the BP oil tanker. We don't like the BP oil tanker. It makes a mess out of our oceans. Style is something you should never use except for prototyping. However, you'll see it all the time if you look at a web inspector, because when JavaScript puts CSS on your page, it does it directly in line with the style attribute. And that is why it is highly recommended to always put your like when you're doing CSS in your JavaScript, don't put CSS in your JavaScript. Don't use .style. Instead, use class changes. Now, of course, like if you're going to do a height show, maybe that's a valid time to do it. Display none. But it's better if you just change the class. Not only that, you can use, it's easier to control. And then important, also, not even to be used in prototyping, to be used when you're like, WTF, I can't figure out why this isn't working. That's the only time I use an important. I put an important in my CSS, and I realize it's still not turning red. And then I realize that the rest of the selector, that my selector is wrong. So this actually, important is not part of the selector, it's part of the attribute value. But it will overwrite any style. And any style, inline style, will overwrite no matter how many selectors you have. So avoid these two. They're dangerous. And ID selectors, there's a debate. Some people think you should use them because it's a little bit faster for the processor to find them. But if you want to write maintainable CSS that you can write across everywhere, use them in limited quantities. Or, just realize that they're very powerful. So let's get back to our talk. So hopefully you've had a chance to play. And we're going to move on. And so you guys might have thought that you had ID, class, and element selectors, right? This is actually what we have. And you're going to learn all this today. And if you want to know what browser support looks like for all of these, don't worry, we're not going to go over them on this slide or even the next slide. But on my, let's see if this works. Yeah. When I said Standardista is really good if you have insomnia, I have grids of browser support. And you'll see some red lines in here. Actually, you only see 4 red lines. And what are they? They're Safari 3.0. Who here uses Safari 3.0? Exactly, no one. So we're not going to worry about this line, but we are going to worry about IE6, IE7, and IE8. So hopefully you guys are fortunate enough and don't need to support IE6. Who here is still supporting IE6?
On some sites.
He works at Yahoo. So, like, they still have, how many millions of people still use IE6?
2 million.
2 million. Are they all in China?
I'm sure part of it.
Yeah, all major insurance companies in this country.
All major insurance, okay. So, you guys are kind of screwed. You're still limited. But you know what? Find another job and then you can use all of this stuff. I started doing mobile web development just so I didn't have to worry about IE anymore. But if you are using IE6 and IE7 and you're using a JavaScript library, there are plugins or frameworks that you can add so that you can get some of the support. Right. And the last slide covers that. Maybe it's not the last slide, but later on. So even if you have to support IE6, so anyway, IE6 doesn't even support the child selector. That's really sad. Okay. Let's stop being depressed and move on to the fun stuff. Okay, so this says IE6 sucks and IE7 support is basic. So we have attribute selectors. Like let's say you're doing an input, a form input. you have type text, right? Type is the attribute, text is the value. Or you have input type checkbox. Type is again the attribute, checkbox is the value. So you can target your elements on your page based on what attributes they have. So, in this example right here, I'm picking all the images that have an alt attribute. Now, all your images should have an alt attribute. It makes your page accessible. If you don't have the alt attribute, the screen reader is going to read the URL to tell the user what the image says. So even if it's empty, put one in, makes it accessible. That's a digression from selectors. But here, this image has an alt. That will match. This form, you might not see it. Can you see what's right here? So this says, inside a form, anything that has a type attribute. So it would really be an input. So input type date would match. Does anyone know what input type date is? HTML5 has 13 new, I think, input types. Date, range, color, number, tel. Use them. They're great, especially for mobile devices. When it says type tel, and you want someone to enter a phone number, you'll actually get a number keyword. So anyway, so what it won't match? Image alt won't match this. There's no alt attribute. Form space type won't match the select because there's no select attribute. So you can actually target with whatever attributes are there. So that's really cool. So we had old attribute selectors, which is just whatever the attribute is, or the attribute with a specific value. So that says, then you can, this right here, this is a pipe. You know the pipe equals? This is old and not very well used, but it basically says match the value if that value val is exactly equal to val, or if there's a dash after it and anything else. So it's basically as if it was a regular expression for any number of characters dash. Just match those characters in front. That's old. That's been supported for a long time. It was in the spec a long time ago. Why? Languages. There's EN US, EN UK. You just want, if it's English, do this. So it says P lang pipe equals EN. And it will match P whether lang is EN-US, EN-UK, or just lang equals EN. Does that make sense to people? So you can create selectors like this. P, you put a bracket, lang, dash equals. If this type wasn't here, it would just only match if it was purely EN. It wouldn't match all those subversions of English. And then we also have the tilde equals value. And that is for a full word. So oddly, though not very necessary, you could do things like, okay, so here, title, tilde equals more. And then it says, want more information about this. And it will match it because here, right here is the word more. If it was like this, it would not match it because it's not a full word. So it has to be a space-separated word, which sometimes you want to, like you can also do a dot class, right? Why would I use, anyone know why I would try targeting with that instead of dot more? I6, don't want to hit I6. This is a cool little hack. Tiffany, what's your opinion on that? Okay.
Use a star selector.
What?
Would use a star
You
selector.
would use a star selector.
Oh, okay. It's an underscore.
That's not necessarily, there's many different ways to target or to omit I6. So he would say, I would use a star hack, or the underscore, rather, to target I6.
Okay.
And the thing is, the underscore is really, really good when you want to target I6. But that one is better when you want to target every browser except I6. So if you don't want to
Yeah,
but it's ugly.
it's not as fast.
It's not as fast. Okay. Okay. So those were IE7 supported stuff. Now we're getting into IE. I would have to look whether it's IE8 or IE9. I think it's IE9. We can start using regular expressions in our attributes. So here we have the caret. It says E attribute caret equals val. So it's element E whose attribute starts with the value val. So let's say you want to target only links that are external. Usually in your navigation, like in your navigation bar, you kind of just put relative links. You're like, go up 3 folders and then down 2 folders and we're good, we're happy. So you don't start that with HTTP. Or, so you could say, attribute, I'm pointing at my computer, it does not help you guys at all. I could do right here, I don't know if I can type here, no I can't. Oh, here it is, I have that example here anyways. So this says, match any link that has the href attribute that starts with HTTP. And that way you can put like a little external symbol on it, right? And that matches HTTP, it matches HTTPS. So we're good. And here in this example right here, we have any attribute that starts with mail to. So that's good for mail to link. You could do telephone. And then you can just put a little icon, right? Style it with a little icon. Say, so that's really powerful. We're also, not only can we start, but we're given the $sign for the end. So anything that ends, match something that ends with whatever val is. So I use this all the time for PDFs. I want them to know that they're going to launch or download something. So I put a little PDF icon on the back as a background image. At the end, I put a little bit of padding. I put way more CSS than this. This is just quickly to show you. But this says right here, it says, match any link that has the href attribute that ends with, the $sign means ends with, PDF. And then we have the star. Remember when we had the tilde and it was any word, but it had to be a space-separated word? Star is actually way more powerful, and it's basically like a regular expression. Not a regular expression at all, but just matches anywhere. So if we had put, there's no example down below, there should be. If we had put like more info, we could have matched the word in. It's anywhere. So it's any element whose attribute matches val anywhere within the attribute. Similar to val above, except that the val can be part of a word. And one more thing to note that I marked down here, multiple attributes work. So if you want to use multiple attribute selectors on a single element, we could do this. And so that would mean match any link that is a PDF that is external. Is basically
So
what
they
this
work
is.
like an and, right?
Yeah.
And the order doesn't matter.
No. Yes, more. I saw another arm go up.
Oh, is there a reason in particular you didn't use .pdf, or I'm just wondering if there's any,
No.
it's just a point, okay.
The other thing I didn't note here is the quotes. Quotes are somewhat optional. Depends on the value. So just quote them. It's easier. I don't actually know what the rules are for quoting and not quoting. I just know that sometimes I'm like, oh, that didn't work, and then I quote it and I'm like, yay. So maybe a period would be one of them. Definitely if there's a space, that's without a doubt. If there's a space, definitely quote it. Case sensitivity, it depends on whether the attribute itself is case sensitive. So this, you could put capital href and it will work fine. But just keep them lowercase. Like right here, like type email. Type email, it's HTML. Case doesn't matter. Please keep them lowercase anyway. If I had written type email, this would have worked as well. But if I had written type unicorn, that would not have matched. It would have been two different things. So let's let's spend a minute or two playing with this, for those of you who have a computer with you. This, like everything else, everything that's gray, you'll see like slightly different shade than this, is editable. So you just edit up here. And you can do things like href. Let's do href ends with PDF. And so you saw how this became overlined? Or if I do starts with PDF, obviously it's not going to be overlined, it's going to be the default underline. But if I change this to HTTP, it matches this one, because this is HTTP, but it does not match this one, because that's local. So I'll just give you like 2 minutes for you guys to play with it, and I'm sorry for those of you who don't have computers. For those of you who didn't bring computers, you can ask me questions while other people are playing with it. There are seats if you want.
So a question on, like, okay, so first is,
Yeah.
do you have like a cheat sheet, like, massive CSS file which has all these rules? And secondly, performance. What happens to the browser when it has to do all these regex and stuff?
So, your browser is basically built to do this kind of stuff. So yes, some of these things are slower than others. Just like using an ID is going to be faster because it's going to try to find that ID. And the thing is, IDs are supposed to be unique on a page. And since people don't make them unique on a page, CSS will continue looking for another ID. So, so it is faster, but it's so minutely faster that I tend not to worry too much. For me, it's much more important that the developer and the developers that follow are able to read and manage the CSS that I create, rather than the 4 milliseconds more that it takes to render the page. So
the other question is like,
Yeah.
Obviously, like, do you use something like jQuery, or now you're like mobile web? If you know like 657, then you can. Because I measured that raw DOM operation
Yeah.
in JavaScript a lot faster than jQuery, like 20 times faster.
So, I mean, jQuery does everything. jQuery actually first uses query selector all to find your queries, to find your queries. So this is CSS, this is not JavaScript. But like when you're using a mobile device, your mobile devices support this, so there's no reason to put in there's no reason to put a jQuery into a mobile device to do a get element by ID or to do a query selector, because it supports it. So there's no reason to, like, don't add jQuery just because it's easier if you want to do 3 things. You know what I mean? If you're actually going to use the calendar widget, plug in jQuery. jQuery is not that expensive, it's not that heavy, but you have to realize, like, sites like Wikipedia, they got nailed because they include jQuery on their mobile site. And have you guys been to the Wikipedia mobile site? There's nothing to it, right? It's not fancy. Why did they include jQuery? To do a get element by ID. Why the heck would you put it in a library to do a get element by ID? Now, the thing is, so you're like, jQuery is small, it doesn't really matter, but it does use energy. When you load, on a mobile device, you first have to bring the JavaScript on, right? But then it caches it. So you're like, oh good, I only did 1 HTTP request, it's cached. The thing is, every time you do a new page load, it parses it. And that's 4 joules of energy. 4 joules of energy, it's not going to kill your battery once. But if you're going to, 900 Wikipedia pages, or any web page, you've just killed your battery. Because you're parsing a JavaScript framework that you don't need. So, nice digression. Everyone finished playing with it?
I have a question.
Yes.
It's on the important attribute.
Yeah.
I was wondering, you said that overrides everything. So
Yeah.
what will happen if I use the important pointing at the same stuff?
Yeah.
Which one will apply? The one it's rendered last, or?
I believe it actually goes back to the specificity rules. But if you have 2 importance in your code, right there you already have a problem. Like, don't use important.
Yeah, I was just wondering which one
Yeah,
applies.
I believe it goes back to
Cascade.
the cascade.
Okay.
Okay. So, we finished with attribute selectors, and now we are going on to pseudoclasses. Now, because with HTML5, we have all these new element input types and states. So, enabled, disabled, and checked have been in the been around in the spec for a really long time, since like 2003, but they were irrelevant to recently until we started supporting HTML5 web forms. So, we have states. Is an element enabled? Is it disabled? Is it checked? You can target, and without any JavaScript, you can update your page based on the state of the page. So here it says input type equals checkbox. Now we know what that means. What does this mean?
Any input that is checkable.
Any input that has the type with the text checkbox. If it's checked, what does the plus mean? Immediately afterwards. So if any input type checkbox that is checked, the label right after that. So the browser's going to find all your checked input types, look for the label if there's a label immediately after that, and if it is, it's going to target that, and it's going to make it red. So here we have an input type checkbox with the label, and an input type with its label. When I click this, wow, there's no JavaScript in this, right? So that's kind of cool. This is what you can do with selectors. So we're not limited to this. We have valid, invalid, required, optional, out of range, read-only, read-write, and default. Yes?
So it's, when you say plus label, it's that it's the next element and it has to be a label.
Yes.
And be selected. Okay.
So it will target any label that comes immediately after checkbox.
And if the thing that comes right after the checkbox is not a label,
Then it just says, okay, that didn't match anything, because if it had been a tilde,
yeah.
so when I was going over the plus and the tilde, what I failed to mention is what it matches on is, does it have the same parent? So it has, like, it's, like if you have a ULLI, and then you end your UL and you start the new UL, well, then the LIs below have a different UL as a parent. So the adjacent is only within the same parent. So yes, they're adjacent. They're at the same level, but they have different parents, so it doesn't count. So back to this. So this is all has to do with HTML5. And if you haven't been experienced HTML5, you get things like color wheels now. Again, there's no there's no JavaScript in this page. That's native in the browser. So we have numbers. You can go up and you can go down, or you can go up, right? In the CSS, and you can go, in the HTML, and we can look at it on the next page, it basically limits it from 5 to 7. So, but it allows me to put other numbers in here, like 8. And did you see that it turned red? If you're, I apologize to people who can't see the color differences, but it did turn red because 8 is not a number between 5 and 7. And in the HTML, I said the number here can only be between 5 and 7. So 8 is out of range, and it's also invalid. So 1 pixel solid red border, check for invalid, and out of range, background color pink, check. So these are more pseudoclasses, and you see there's no JavaScript in this. It's just basically on the UI. These selectors can be used to target UI features that the user's changing. And so it dynamically updates. It looks like there's JavaScript, but there is none. So we're not going to play with this right now, because not enough people have computers. But you guys can look at the HTML later on when you're home and see, or we can change this to blue. You know, you can see that it's all CSS. Do you guys know how I made this editable and how the CSS works, even though there's no JavaScript in this page?
No?
So the frame source, which no one can read, style is in the head, right? So head style display none. Content editable, you can write style first of type, visibility hidden. And then I do this, style last of type, and I give it all these features, and somewhere in there I say display block.
You did that at the top.
Oh, display block a heading
Right
style.
here. Okay, thank you. I was hard to read that. Okay, I should probably face you guys and do this way. So, I'm basically saying, show the head, show the styles, display them block, because it's the user agent that's saying, hey, don't show them. I'm saying show them, and then I'm saying hide the first one, don't hide the second one. And then you see this property right here, content editable. You're thinking, wow, new feature. IE5 had this, content editable. That's how I'm able to edit the pages. Nothing's saved on the server, but it does update the DOM. So that's another cool little feature. And so all I'm doing is editing this stuff, and it's showing as if it was live, because it is live. Ooh, and then I made it really too big. So what I'm doing is I'm just changing the CSS on the fly. Okay, so we have covered UI selectors, UI pseudoclasses, and when it comes to the specificity that we talked about earlier, the attribute selectors and the UI pseudoclasses are all as if they were a class. They have the same weight as a class. So less weight than an ID and more weight than an element selector. But what's really cool is we can actually target elements based on where they are on the page. Who here has ever entered the class last or first on their first or last element so that they could change the borders? Who here has never used CSS? You know? That's one of the things we do all the time. We're like, here's, you know, at the bottom of the page, I want the links to the whole site, and with 10 pixels of padding on the right, then put a pipe, and then put 10 pixels of margin, and then you have the next element. But you know what, on the last one, don't put that pipe or that margin on the right. That's what we do, right? We put class last on the last one. You don't need to do that. You can use last child or last of type. Wait.
Next
You don't have a lot of type on there.
Thank you.
Well,
Last
there
of
it
type.
is, yeah.
Yeah, look at the computer. Okay.
On the right side.
So we're going to cover all of these. And some of them are easier to understand, so we're going to walk through. And notice down here, CSS2 IE8. So this is all supported in IE8. Which surprises me. It's so nice to work in global space where you don't have to worry about all of this support.
Keep bragging.
I'm going to get punched after a weird time. Okay, so we have first, last, and only. We have first of type and first child. First of type means go down until you find the first one. Until you find the first child that is of this type. Whereas first child only looks at the first child. Does it match? Yes. Good? No? Oh well, stop looking. So first child is actually faster. But you know what? That makes no sense to most people. So we're going to do this by example. So here we have a page, and it just has a bunch of divs. The divs have a background color of white, and a 10 pixels margin. So these are all divs, just believe me on that. And then everything else says what it is. This is an H1, and then these are paragraphs. There's a paragraph here in H1, and H2, another H2. Then we have this is the third H1, an H2, this is an H3, and this is an H1. So just realize that there's paragraphs, H1s, H2s, and H3s. That's the only thing to really know about the page. So I did this. Star color equals red, and font style equals italic. Matches everything, right? That was just a placeholder. Then I do first child. Oh, first child. It only matches this whole thing. Why does it match this whole thing? Because the div is inheriting from the div. So the div is the first child of the body.
And we put a paragraph before the H1 on the second one. That was also
Yep.
lit up.
Yep, because they're the first childs of those divs.
Yep.
If I do last child, the whole thing's going to light up. You know why?
Because I believe you have a div that covers the whole paragraphs and another div that covers the editable.
Good thinking, but no. The HTML element has how many children? 2, head, body. First child is head, last child is body. So that's what it's matching the body. So everything else is inheriting, right? So usually most people put div, 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 and it would also match that way, but I didn't actually, it's really simple code. So last child matches everything, except for if I do like this div here, right? So it says div, that's the last child. So it matches the last one. Div, that is the first child, it only matches the first one. If I do first of type, it also matches the first one and not the last one. I could do last of type. Nope, last. And it matches the last one. But I could also do H2 or P. Let's do P, last of type. So it's the last paragraph in every div, because it's the last of its type. Whereas if I'd done last child, doesn't change because every single one except for the last one doesn't have a paragraph. But if I just do, I'm going to do this. Put it body, oh, body. So there's a space in there. So it says within the body, the last child of all of its children. So we first get the last one anyways, because this is the last div. We get the last paragraph, and the last paragraph. If we had done first child, it would be the first div, the first paragraph, the first H3 and the first H1, because they're the first children. But if we do first of type, we're going to get more. Because we get the first div, but in this one we get the first paragraph, the first H1, the first H2, and then down here we also get the first H3. Does that make sense to people? If we do last, this H1 is at the top. Oh, none of them have two H1s, sorry. But this one has two H2s, so it's the last one that gets it. Does that make sense? So now we have a full and complete understanding of first child, first of type, and last of type. We also have only of type, and so it matches anything that is the only one within its parent. Now notice that this is the only H3 on the page, but that doesn't matter. It's the only one within its parent. So here, the H1 here, it's the only one within its parent, but this is a different parent because the div is, so it's based on, like, it's basically taking every parent and looking at its children, and then looking at those children's children. But those children's children, like, it's only one level of inheritance. It's not grandchildren. Does that make sense to people? Anyone confused? Because I just made it sound really confusing. I apologize for that.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
The first last is by node, DOM node order, right? Not
Yeah.
by like if it's to absolute position.
Yeah, exactly. This is completely source order, rather than where it is on the page. Oops, I just went crazy.
I keep having that happen to me.
Okay, so that was kind of powerful, but it was basically shorthand for something else. And what it was shorthand for was nth child of 1, right? First child is nth child 1. But the thing is, we can actually be much more, this can be much more robust than just the first and the last child and only child. We can actually use these equations, and the equation is an plus b, where b is the offset, a is the number, like the iterator, and n is just the letter n. It means basically like when you were doing algebra in 7th grade. Some of you might have been doing it in 5th because you're too smart. Some of you still have never done it, but that's okay too. So a plus b is the equation, and we do have two keywords because CSS likes to make our life easy, and they gave us even and odd, which is the same thing as 2n and 2n plus or minus 1. So nth child 3n will match every third element, number 3, number 6, number 9. If we do this, it will match the first element, the 4th element, the 7th element. Basically, just start when you're thinking about it, n, the first iteration is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I do this here with 9, it's actually going to be the 9th, the 12th, and it's not going to match the 6th or the 3rd. So basically, we learned the difference between type and child in the last slide, right? So just, I'm not going to go over the difference between type and child anymore, but I am going to go over this equation. Or maybe actually I'll go. So here we have this weird little table. And each table just has one each row just has one TR. I could have done TDE, but whatever. So TR is the first child of the parent, and the last child is bold. And if you look at number 1 and number 10, they're bold, right? First of type, last of type are the exact same two, because it's TR is the first of, it only has children, TRs as children, so it's the same thing. But stripe through right there. Now it says nth child even, that's the keyword even, make the background gray. And if you notice 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 are gray. It says nth child 3, make the color gray. And if we go right here, we see that the color is gray. That's the third one. It just has the number 3. So you can target, and the thing is, let's say who here has ever made a zebra table and put the class even and odd in? Okay. That was 50% of the people raised their hand, and the other 50% are asleep. It's one of the things we do all the time. We make, it's not true, not 100% of people, because not everyone has to.
And there is another way to do it anyway. You could have the background of the table and then do only odd or only
Right,
even.
but what I'm saying
You
is
don't need to do
basically,
both.
you zebra
Just to show that I was not sleeping. So
Oh, okay. He's my heckler.
Yeah, do it the Microsoft way, like maybe one of the rows are maybe like 20% of a color, and the next row 40%, then 20, then 40, and, you know, like.
You could
Yeah,
do
basically.
that too, but basically you need to put a class on it.
Yeah.
And you could
Yes.
but you could do each third. So
Same-
instead
same
of doing even, I could have done 3N, and then so it would be stripy, you know, like we could do rainbow stripes to make the whole thing really ugly. And you'd be amazed at how many times I do that, just to prove a point. Okay, so we have even, they're all gray. Third one is gray. And the thing is, if we reverse the sort order, like if you're sorting it, when you're doing it when you're sorting a table in HTML and you have to put the class of even and odd, when you sort it, you have to then resort the even and odd.
Yes, that's a pain.
Here, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You just say every even one, make it gray. When you change the source order, it's like, oh, I don't care. I'm just making every even one gray. So you're fine.
Yeah, I've seen tables where it's like, it's not just the rows that are like, but columns too. Like if you have like TDs in there, you could.
Yeah,
and you make
that's a different way of styling. But let's
Yeah.
just move on for
Yeah.
right now. So then we have odd, and the odd ones are white. We're good. 4N, it says make the color this brownish red. Number 4 and number 8 are that brownish red. And then it says 3N minus 1. So it goes, first it puts in so 0 is negative 1, so we can't see that. But then it says if N was 1, what does that come out to? 2, right? If N was 2, then the number's 5. So 2, 5, and 8 will be italic. And we look here, 2, 5, and 8. If I had used a font that was more dramatically italic, you would actually be able to see it. But you can't really see it. Believe me, 2, 5, and 8 are italic. So this slide shows you one thing that no one's ever been able to do with CSS, and you really totally can do with CSS, which is, you know when you want to make, like you don't know how many elements you have going across, and you're like, oh, if I only have 1, I want to take up 100% of the room space. If I have 2, I want them each to be 50%. If I have 3, I want them each to be 33%. If I have 4, I want them to be 25%. And you're kind of like, how the hell do I do that? Structural selectors. So all this is it's 4 ordered lists, or unordered lists, I don't remember what the code is. First one is 1 li, second one is 2, third one is 3, fourth one has 4. So what I do is I say, when the li is the first of its type, and the last of its type, which means it's the first from the top and the first from the bottom, which means there's only one, make the width 100%.
Can you have also used like only or something like that? No, only.
Let me just go through this.
Okay.
li nth of type 1, yeah, you could have totally have done only child. That would work. li nth of type 1, and last of type 2, which means it's 2 from the bottom, 1 from the top. which means how does that happen? That only happens if you only have 2 elements, right? And then we also say li nth of type 2, which is the second from the top, and the first from the bottom. Make the width of 50%. I'm going to skip just for the time, I'm going to skip because it's the same thing over and over again. Li nth of type 1, which is also the fourth from the bottom. That means there's exactly 4 elements. Make the width 25%. Not necessarily the best use of, but if you really need to do this, like if you're only going up to 3 elements, why not? It gets a little bit hefty if you're doing 12. You know what I mean? Like, that's a lot of CSS. But it is possible. You can do some really cool stuff. So if you have a computer, you can feel free to play with this, but what this says is tr, so this is a table with a bunch of cells, and this is not exactly how I would code, but this is just to prove a point. I'm going to make diagonal stripes. So right here it says tr nth of type even, nth of type, td nth of type even. So it means every even cell in every even row, make the background color red and the color of the text white. Then there's a comma right here. tr nth of type odd, td nth of type odd, also make it white. So what that's saying is, find every second cell in every even row and make it red, and find every odd cell in every odd row and make it red. And that's how we got this, basically these diagonals. That was the same as saying 2n, but we're going to do 3n. And then we're going to so you see I was able to just change the striping on that. And in fact, if you really, this is just to show you how powerful it is, because if I change the DOM source order, it's still going to stripe it the exact same way. If I move all the cells around in sort order, it'll still be this silly stripey thing. And because I don't always have things to do on Friday nights, I did this. So that's just a table cell. That's the same table as the page before. Yeah.
That's amazing. Does it go back pretty far in the older browsers, or?
I8 according to my slides, but I don't believe it. I think it's I9, but I'm going to check. I can check.
That's very cool.
I think it's this page. No, apparently not. Border properties, background, follow selectors, here it is. Yeah, it's not supported in I8, it's supported in I9.
Okay.
Okay, so how did I do this stuff? There's many ways to skin a cat, as they say, but the way I did it is, I'm just going to read through it. So TD, every single table cell was white with a background color of white. I just made the whole thing white to start with, so I had the blank canvas. Then I said TD nth of type odd, so all the odd rows, TR rather, nth of type odd, TD nth of type 8. So I found the 8th cell, and then I said all the TDs afterwards, make it red with a background color of red. So what that did is it made all of this red, 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 from here on over red, from here on over red. But I wanted these rows to be red all the way across. So that's the next part of the line, which is TR nth of type 2n plus 9. So every second one, starting with number 9, every TD, not tilde. So here I found the 8th cell, and then the one afterwards, and after that. I used the adjacent sibling selector right there. See that tilde? And I used plus 9 instead of plus 1 or minus 1. So that basically jumped so that when n is 0, plus 9, that's the 9th one. And then I used generated content for the stars. So I said 2n plus 7 TD after, put a star in there and move it over. So I'll let you guys look at it later. This is not a good use of CSS, but this is just to prove the power of CSS. So we've seen what CSS can do. One of the things that it can also do is exclude stuff that you want to exclude. Using the not, the negation pseudoclass. So the not, remember we were talking about specificity? The not is like the star, it has no value. But whatever you put in here adds weight. So this is div, which is 001, plus class, exclude me, 010. So it comes out to 01-1 in terms of specificity. So it basically says, match every div except for the one that has the class exclude me. And inside of here, what can you put inside of here? You can put what they call a simple selector. And you might not have thought that this was a simple selector until you came in today, but that is actually a simple selector. What they mean by a simple selector is something that doesn't have a hierarchical relationship, so you can't use the tilde or the greater than parent-child relationships. It's just a simple, like, simple level selector. So that's what can go in there. So we can play with that. So here it says li that is not the first child. So it's making everything red and bold except for the first li. So we could do nth of type 3n. So it's matching every single li except for the one that's a third of it, 3, 6, 9. So 1, 2 are red, 3, 6, 9, 12 are not matched, and neither is this one right here because it's a third of its parent. So that's how you can negate. And you can also just say, not my class. Oh, typo right there. Okay, so this has class my class, this has class my class, and this has class my class. So it's matching everything except for things with class my class. Okay. So that's the not. Then we also have the empty. And this is not the most useful thing in the world. The only thing I use it for, is like if this is a comment, this is the two things that would match. P that's empty, but you can match empty things. If someone has a good use for it, let me know.
It's not empty, do something.
Exactly, if it's not empty, do something. Very good. And then we have other pseudoclasses, and you've probably used these before. These are supported in I6, 7, and 8. And interestingly, visited and link are not that supported anymore, and that's the security reason. Because people could see, people could use JavaScript to see if something was a certain way, and then say, oh, they've been to Bank of America, let me try hacking into the Bank of America account. So for security reasons, you're limited on how you style based on link and visited now. We have hover, active, and focus. We have lang, which is language, and then target. Target is when you're doing an anchor link in a page. That's a target of the page. So Chris Coyer came up with this great example, and I'm going to open it up. So here, hard to see, but we have tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. They're all gray because none of them are selected. Because up here we don't have a pound sign, right? And it says, I'm going to look at this right here. It says section that is not the target. The A should be gray. And so these are very light gray. I should make it darker so you can see it. When it is the target, make it white. And then change the Z index of the div that is a child of the target. So when I click on tab 1, see how it says pound sign tab 1? This right here has become white, and this is the div of that. So I can just, there's no JavaScript on this page, but I'm changing the colors of the tabs. So that is also the power of CSS selectors. So if you're showing and hiding divs, and the person doesn't have JavaScript turned on, you can still actually show and hide divs. Then we have the root. The root right now is the root element. It's the HTML element. You could just use HTML. But we're going to be using this a lot more in the future when we are when CSS level 4, whatever, the variable modules come out, and also when you're supporting, some browsers support rem, which is a root munit, which, you know when you use munits and then you put an munit inside an munit and then all of a sudden you have really huge or really tiny font? An REM, you basically define the font size on the root, and then you stay within your body, make it 0.8 of the root munit, or 0.9, or 1.2, and it's always relative to the exact same size. And that way you don't have these things growing and shrinking unexpectedly like you might with M. So it's It's really powerful, and I use it all the time because I can, but some people can't because they're still supporting older browsers. Ha ha! Sorry. Okay. Then we have pseudo elements, and this, in terms of specificity, is element nodes. It's only 001, but it doesn't really matter because you're not going to be able to target that element with any other method. So, so in terms of specificity, whatever the weight is in the end doesn't really matter. So we can target the first line of the page. We can target the first letter of the page, and we can do this since forever. Newer is selection. Did you guys notice that when I'm highlighting this, it's turning red? That's because I changed the selection to, when I was highlighting stuff before, like this, I didn't have it styled, but that's what selection is. I can style what's selected. And before or after is generated content, and that's supported from IE8 on.